Okay, well, looks like we are on the air now. Greetings. Thank you for attending this session of Kaiju Masterclass. This is Godzilla versus Biollante, the lost commentary, I guess is the best way to put it. My name is Ed Godziszewski. Maybe some of you know me by my work. I've done a lot of work together with Steve Reifel. We are co-authors of the Ishiro Honda biography, Ishiro Honda, A Life in Film from Godzilla to Kurosawa. And I'm also editor and publisher of Japanese Giants magazine, and author and publisher of the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Godzilla. Today I'm going to talk about one of my more favorite Godzilla films, Godzilla versus Biollante, and specifically I want to talk about the commentary track which I recorded for Echo Bridge Company several years ago. It's funny, when I was looking at the files to bring up the script that I had written back at the time I recorded the commentary, I didn't realize it had been so long ago. It was fall of 2012 that this commentary track that I did was recorded. And unfortunately, Echo Bridge at that time had contacted me because they were putting out a Blu-ray of Godzilla versus Biollante. And I was all the more, quite eager to do it. And they were really good working with me. They were very supportive. And the unfortunate part was that Toho, as with everything that has to do with their product, Toho had to approve in advance the commentary track before they were able to put it on the disc. And Toho was slow in getting the approvals put out for the commentary. So unfortunately, it came down to the last moment where they needed to get the disc into the authoring house. Toho still hadn't finished their approvals, so they had to go forward with the disc without using the commentary track. So unfortunately, this track has stayed in my possession since that time. Since Echo Bridge had paid for it, I really didn't feel like I was within my rights to release it without their approval. So it's kind of been in limbo since that time. So this is a good chance for me to share some of the stories that I was able to come up with for the commentary track and some of my other thoughts on the film. And hopefully you'll find this a worthwhile 50-minute session, which will give you some of the highlights of things that I talked about on the commentary track. Now, Godzilla versus Biollante is a film that I kind of have a unique relationship with. Back when the film was first coming out, actually about a year in advance, in November of 1988, I had a trip to Japan. It was actually my honeymoon trip with my wife. And at that time, I had a visit to Toho, and my friend introduced me to special effects director Koichi Kawakita. And at that time, he showed us the planning book for Godzilla versus Biollante, which at that time had not been released or had not been announced as an official title, but it was something that they were, they had in deep pre-production. And a few months later, towards the end of 1989, a few months before release, a friend of mine was able to provide me with a copy of the version 2 script for this film, not the final script, but one which was like a preliminary version. He also sent me a camcorder copy of a work print of the film that was made in the end of October of 1989. So I got to see, the work print, which had also basically the human drama was pretty much exactly the same as what wound up in the finished film, but special effects wise, there were a lot of extra scenes that never made it to the final film. And it's kind of fun to in a way to watch this version because there's no sound effects, there's no Foley work. All the effects are lacking the animation, but they had like Godzilla's atomic breath and the maser rays are all scratched onto the film just to give the viewer an impression of what it's going to look like. Optical effects are missing, but it was really quite an interesting experience to see the film in that way. And then following that, I I was provided with a video copy right at the time of the film's release of a TV special making of Godzilla versus Biollante, and it had tacked onto it like a 20-minute digest version of the film. I also, a few months later, got a peek at a book that never was released called The Art of Godzilla versus Biollante, which showed all sorts of different storyboards and design concepts that many of which still haven't been printed to this day. So, there was a lot of background information that I had on this film, and I used it to make an entire issue of my magazine, Japanese Giants, the number 8 issue. And of course, since that time, back in 1990, when I did that issue, I've been able to find out a lot more about this film, which had also helped in preparing the commentary track. And just before I was doing the commentary track, I had a business trip to Japan, and I decided to look up an old associate, Fuyuki Shinada, who's a suit maker for Biollante in this film. I met him back in 1979 during my first visit to Japan, and he had been with myself and my friends when we visited Toho for the first time at that point. So there's a lot of background that I have with this film, and hopefully it's going to provide you with some unique and interesting information about it. Godzilla vs. Biollante, if I may, let me start. I have a slideshow that will be a lot more interesting than watching me. So hang on for a moment, and I'm going to try to activate that. Okay, and hopefully this is, now you should be able to see the first poster for Godzilla vs. Biollante. Now, this film is very, I think, very unique among all the Godzilla films because it really marked a changing of the guard and a concerted attempt to instill a lot of new and interesting ideas into the Godzilla series, both from a story viewpoint as well as a technical viewpoint. It's very innovative and maybe not always successful. Sometimes the grasp of the filmmakers, they just couldn't quite reach out far enough to accomplish what they were looking for. But I really appreciate the effort involved here and how really fun and interesting it was to see how this film came to be. Godzilla vs. Biollante actually took had about a 5-year odyssey from the time that the 1984 film was released until Biollante came out. The 1984 film was fairly successful for Toho. I mean, it drew in about 1.7 billion yen in the winter of 1984 through January 1985. That was in Japan. It was called A Season of G, and Godzilla vs. Biollante was the number 3 film behind Ghostbusters and Gremlins, which is not bad company to be in. The Toho's goal at that time was 2 billion yen for the box office, so it fell a little bit short. But overall, they were Toho was okay with how the film did, but they really felt like they were missing the boat. Something just wasn't quite right. They did a lot of audience research on the 84 film, and they found out the audience was about 50% college-age kids, and 40% was elementary school of the remaining balance. And in Toho's estimation, for the film to be really successful, they needed to appeal more to teenage audiences. Also, audience feedback gave them the idea that something was missing. Something was missing in this film. That it just didn't quite have that little extra to make the audience really excited. There was it didn't have as much entertainment value, at least entertainment in terms of the way that the audiences were hoping for it at that time in Japanese cinema. They were looking for more like a Western style of entertainment. And there was actually comments from lots of the audience for '84 that they thought that this was actually the end. That the '84 film was meant to be the end of the Godzilla series, which was actually surprising to me that anybody would have thought that. The basic thing that Toho took from this was, they were concerned that the audience was considering Godzilla as something that was passé. So producer Tanaka thought, the best approach to take for another film would be to reach out into the film world and try to find a new generation of filmmakers, and to get the public also excited and interested in another Godzilla film. Tanaka, in June of 1985, decided to hold the Godzilla Story Contest. And, the basic idea was that they were looking for a very strong opponent for Godzilla and to create something that's more in the vein of Hollywood-style entertainment. For the panel of judges, they got, a number of science fiction writers and critics from Japan. Of course, they added a Toho representative, and they also were able to get Osamu Tezuka, the famous manga artist and father of manga in Japan. This was a panel of judges. And altogether, they got 5,025 entries for story treatments, of which they picked 15 finalists. And out of those 15 finalists, there were 4 final version finalists, with 3 alternates were picked. And those titles were Godzilla vs. Biollante, The Invisible Devil, Godzilla 2, The Grave from 80 million years ago, Godzilla vs. the Giant Robot Force, The Blood of Godzilla, and New Godzilla 2. Now, all of these films, there were several common themes among most all of the stories. The 3 most prominent were Godzilla being used as a weapon controlled by a third party, such as a mad scientist, the United States, and even Hitler was in control of Godzilla at one point in one of these story treatments. The second kind of theme for a story that was submitted was Godzilla, a typical VS story, basically Godzilla versus something. And the third theme that was pervading these entries was a biological theme, which especially revolved around some kind of cloning of Godzilla. And out of all these stories, the typical methods that were being used to defeat Godzilla, probably the most prominent one was using the oxygen destroyer again. Another technique for defeating Godzilla would have been ice or snow, his susceptibility to cold in the environment. Some of them used time slip as a way to defeat Godzilla, and there was even one story that had Godzilla being shot out into space, much like Gamera from the first Gamera film. Out of all these, I'm sorry, I have forgotten to advance the slideshow. Out of all these stories, Godzilla vs. Biollante was by far and away the front runner of them. And especially for producer Tanaka, what appealed to him was that it combined both the VS, the versus type story, plus biotechnology. And especially when it came to the versus theme, that was something that producer Tomiyama also thought was a must for this kind of film. Now, Godzilla vs. Biollante was written by this individual here. His name is Shinichiro Kobayashi. Kobayashi was a dentist by trade, but he was also a big science fiction and Japanese monster film fan. And, it wasn't just that he was, some guy who wanted to, contribute to the Godzilla story contest. He actually had some experience in writing scripts for science fiction and special effects shows. He wrote an episode of Return of Ultraman that had to do with Leogon, which was a plant-animal hybrid. So this kind of story was pretty much in his wheelhouse. His story happened to be about a biologist who was crossbreeding different species. And one species that he made was called Dutalios, which you see a version of here, which was a hybrid of a fish and a rat. But in the course of his work, he also was secretly working on a biological combination of a human and a plant. He had a daughter, a young daughter, who tragically died when she was young, and he had taken her cells and he was trying to preserve the memory of his daughter by combining her cells with those of an alumni plant. The Dutalios, in the course of events in this story, winds up mutating, growing gigantic, and escaping from the scientist's lab, scientist being Dr. Shiranui. And he is, not only has he escaped, but he appears in Yokohama, which attracts the attention of Godzilla. And Godzilla returns and battles and defeats Dutalios in Yokohama. Now, eventually, the plant starts to mutate out of control, and it breaks out of the scientist's lab. And again, Godzilla is attracted by this huge life form. And the conclusion of this story, Godzilla and the plant battle against each other. And when the plant excretes a kind of sap onto Godzilla, the self-defense force has their maser division on hand there. And the masers, when they shoot the sap that's on Godzilla's body, it burns him badly and eventually causes Godzilla to abandon the scene and go back into the ocean. So that was the basic summary of the story, which was of interest to Toho. This, by the way, this artwork here, this is basically how Kobayashi had viewed what Biollante would be like. That Biollante was going to appear in a forest next to the laboratory. Now, after picking this story, Tanaka called Kobayashi to his office and asked him to make a screenplay out of the story treatment, which itself was unusual because ordinarily the studio would ask a professional script writer to make their first draft screenplay from a story treatment. So anyway, at that time, Tanaka's advice to Kobayashi was, one, get rid of Dutalios because it would cost too much in terms of the budget. They didn't want to have an extra monster. He also suggested he add the Middle East angle to the film, to the story, and Tanaka himself suggested the inclusion of G cells, which I think was quite a brilliant idea because it really it went a long ways to explain how Godzilla could be so invulnerable to attacks from of any and all types. And it kind of goes along with the biotechnology angle of this particular story. So in July of '86, or excuse me, in January of '86, Kobayashi submitted a 120-page draft story where he, followed Tanaka's suggestions, got rid of Dutalios, added the Arabian agents, and added the mutation of Biollante into the story. He also thought that by leaving out Dutalios, that Godzilla needed, another powerful adversary. So he added Super X2 instead of another creature into the film. And his final contribution was the addition of the psychic girl who would be able to communicate with Biollante. Whoops, excuse me. So enter Kazuki Omori, who's the gentleman on the left of this photo. He's seated here with Godzilla, and on the right, special effects director Koichi Kawakita. Kazuki Omori was actually a filmmaker who didn't start out to be a filmmaker. He attended medical college. That was his focus when he was in school, but he made a name for himself by making singing idol films. And Tomiyuki Tanaka at this time was looking for an outsider from the Toho staff, and Omori happened to be somebody who had drawn his attention because of his idol films. And it looked like a good opportunity for Tanaka to advance the idea of generational change and also add a little bit of action into their films. So he called in Kazuki Omori to have a discussion about Godzilla versus Biollante. And when Omori went in to see him, he thought, well, gee, is this a mistake? Why are they asking me to do this? Or maybe, they're looking for me to do the writing, because his work, up to this point had been nothing like Godzilla, and he wasn't known as a big Godzilla aficionado or anything. Tanaka asked him his opinion on the story finalists, and out of the finalists, Omori had picked Biollante as his favorite. And I think that, according to Omori, the fact that there was, some kind of scientific background to this, there was some biotechnology, and him having a medical background, that also had some appeal to him. And the fact that Omori had picked Biollante as his choice out of the story finalists kind of cemented in his mind that this was the guy he wanted to direct the film, and not only to direct it, but also to write it. Now, Omori at this meeting, he was rather hesitant, like, well, wait a minute, why don't you get a real science fiction writer to write this? But Tanaka, in his very Japanese manner, said, well, if you were to do it, how would you do it? And, basically in Japanese, that means please do it. So in that regard, Omori gave some consideration to the offer and accepted. And Tanaka just tasked him with the job of making this film more fast-paced, a little more American style of entertainment. And he also made the suggestion that he, opened the film with a 007 style of scene, and that was something that really appealed to Omori, because although he was not a Godzilla fan at all, or even particularly interested in science fiction, for him, what he really enjoyed in filmmaking were Western films, especially those of 007. So the chance that he had that he was going to be able to incorporate his love of Western and 007 style films was very attractive to him. And he also, looking at Godzilla, he thought, this would be a way for him to make an authentic Japanese entertainment film. He could get away from what he viewed as the rut that Japanese filmmakers were in, where they're mostly being just copycats of Western films. He thought, Godzilla is more Japanese. He can take, concepts from Western films, but make a uniquely Japanese piece of entertainment. So, for writing and his research, he started to read a lot of adventure novels, biotechnology, and botany textbooks. And his concept of Godzilla was, well, as a kid, he thought Godzilla was scary, but he didn't feel like audiences in today's world would find Godzilla as something to be scary. The world is a lot smaller, and technology is much more advanced. So his thought was to make Godzilla powerful and impressive, and derive drama from how man and mankind would deal with such an overwhelming force. Now, the initial target release for Godzilla vs. Biollante was supposed to be December of 1986, which would have pretty much fallen in the normal production schedule that these films would have, where they'd go through ideas in the first few months of a year, assemble a staff, and then start filming probably in June. As Omori wrote in a magazine article, Toho was at that time interested in making singer idol films, and there was a film in production in particular at that time called Girls in Love that was ready for a year-end release. And because there were some problems in the production of this film, they were looking for a new director, so they asked Omori to step in and direct this film. Now, actually, it was actually a reasonably smart idea, because it would give him an opportunity to get some experience of making a film in the Toho system before attacking a big project such as Godzilla versus Biollante. So, mutually, he and Toho agreed that he would go ahead and direct that film, and in the meantime, he would still continue developing his screenplay for Godzilla versus Biollante. The film turned out to be a big hit, and Omori got a Best Director award. So, he continued, working on his script. But since, from Toho's viewpoint, this kind of idol film was much lower cost and lower risk than something like Godzilla, they decided to continue making those films. So for the next couple of years, Toho continued to concentrate on the idol films, and Godzilla versus Biollante sort of remained in development limbo. But finally, come 1988, in the middle of the year, producer Shogo Tomiyama formally submitted a production plan to Toho management for Godzilla vs. Biollante, with the idea that it would be released in the summer of 1989 so that they could avoid conflict with their year-end idol films. Now, the booklet for the production plan featured this particular painting that you see here, in which Biollante kind of, gives you a little bit of an impression that it's a giant stalk with a head much like the queen alien. Aliens just being out of the theaters for about a little more than a year at the time that this plan was submitted. You also see that this particular version of Biollante, they already had come up with the idea that it was more like a pitcher plant, so it had all these appendages with fanged mouths on the end. And although it's not very prominent, if you look down in the lower right, you'll see what he envisioned as Super X2, which not very prominently, but basically, the Super X2 was already equipped with a fire mirror in this particular version of the story. In the planning book for this that Tomiyama submitted, it said that this would be the only Toho-produced film of the year which had international appeal, and that Omori was considered to be the new wind in the sails of the Japanese film industry. So they happened to have a lot of hopes for this film. And unfortunately, Toho was helping produce the movie Gunhead, co-production with Sunrise, and that film wound up getting delayed until it got pushed back to a summer 1989 release. So unfortunately, with many of the staff that were working on Gunhead being assigned to Biollante, Godzilla vs. Biollante yet again got delayed. But finally, the idol movie fad was fading out. And so finally, in May of 1989, Godzilla vs. Biollante finally got the official okay to be released. Unfortunately for all the people involved, they were planning to release it in December of 1989. So there was scarcely 6 months from the moment it was released for the film to be put together, filmed, edited, and released into theaters, which is an incredibly short period of time. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't that unusual for films to have 3-month production periods. But for a more modern production, this was completely unheard of. They didn't even have a chance to begin filming until August. So actually, the amount of time, August, September, October, was the time that was set aside for filming, 1 month for post-production, and get it into the theaters by the beginning of December. That's quite an enormous task to prepare. Fortunately, because the film had been in development for so long, there was a lot of work that had already been done. They had 3 years worth of script revision. And so once the film was released, Kawakita and Omori met up in Kobe to polish up the script. And a lot of the special effects staff that Kawakita had worked with on Gunhead were able to just kind of roll over from Gunhead and sign on and work in the staff for this new film. Kawakita mentioned this was how we got an all-new crew for this new generation of films. So from his viewpoint, it was okay. They didn't have to go out and hire a lot of the old people that they were trying to move away from. They really were able to break fresh and get a new staff. Now, since 1989 and 1986, a lot of design works had been already done, as I said. The mechanics, things like Super X2, the Masers, and the Thunder Beams, all of that had already been designed by Ko Yokoyama under Tetsuo Ozawa's art staff. For Biollante design still wasn't settled on. There was an intense effort that was being made to figure out what kind of way that they should realize Biollante. And there were several different concepts. One was some kind of walking monster form, such as what you see here, or an animal hybrid of it with a plant, or even a lot of ideas about immovable plants. There were a lot of weird flower designs, but a lot of them really didn't seem to have any attacking ability. And Toho was really looking more for something more menacing that kind of de-emphasized the plant aspect. And so as time started running out, you can see this particular rendition of Biollante, which was made by artist Shinji Nishikawa, who's done a lot of production art for Toho, as well as lots of his own. He's become famous as a sketch artist of Godzilla and Toho creatures. He put together this version of Biollante with the kind of animal-like mouth that was added on the top here that eventually would. This was basically the image that they decided to go with, just replacing the four-way opening mouth that you see here with the more crocodile type version that the final form of Biollante would have. Effects director Kawakita really wanted to have Biollante mutate in this film. I mean, from his viewpoint, this creature itself is a combination of a human, a plant, and Godzilla with unstable cells. So as it grows, it seemed that it's natural that the G cells would become more dominant, and this creature would become more animal-like and get more powerful, and therefore prove to be much more of a threat against Godzilla. The only aspect that they didn't have to worry about in terms of design was Godzilla himself, because that aspect of the production design was already quite clear. So let's talk a little bit about the script for this film. Biotechnology was prominent in as the key feature of this screenplay. It made the film topical and relevant, since biotechnology research was exploding at this time, and major developments such as the cloning of creatures such as Dolly the sheep, the first successfully cloned creature, that was just a few years off. It had the advantage of being a change of pace from the usual anti-nuclear theme, and ethical implications of tampering with nature were very much under debate in the news at this time. It gave quite a good relevance to the audience. Biotechnology kind of really drove all the main plot devices. Again, as I said before, in terms of G cells, you were able to explain Godzilla's invulnerability. And it also tied in the radiation aspect of Godzilla, because obviously the radiation was what was basically the the force behind Godzilla's G cells being able to regenerate. It was like the food that Godzilla's cells needed. It's also led to the development of probably the most logical means that mankind ever came up with to try and defeat Godzilla, which is anti-nuclear bacteria. It's really an interesting and believable idea that that mankind could actually defeat Godzilla with something like that attacked the very basis of which Godzilla used for his invulnerability. I thought this was really the strongest point of the screenplay and quite a clever idea. Adding spies and the 007 aspect were something that Omori really wanted in this film, but unfortunately, it really misses the mark badly. I mean, he used a rather poor cast of characters. The actors that that were picked, they look a lot more like street gang members. They really don't have any style or dangerous edge to them. They're just kind of like punks that are out there with hired jobs. And they also, I have to say that their ability to shoot guns, they must have been recruited from the Imperial Stormtrooper Academy, because they really couldn't hit anything. The Saladian agent SS9, who is somewhat of a main character in the film, he pretty much just doesn't have the look of somebody that you would take seriously as a dangerous assassin, and he delivers hokey one-liners in a lame attempt to kind of copy the kind of quips that you'd hear from 007 in some of the earlier films. And he even goes as far as wearing sunglasses at night inside of a dark room in Shiragami's lab, apparently thinking that looking cool is probably a lot more important than being able to see clearly. For 3 years of development on this story, it's really disappointing that this part of the screenplay was so badly handled. And overall, the story is a continuation from 1984, and it marks the beginning of the whole aspect of the 90s films, where it was one big continuing story arc. So up through Destroyer in 1995, you have this being just one part of an overall arcing story. One interesting thing about this film, where Godzilla appears from Mount Mihara, in real life, Mount Mihara had become active at this time. And so, not only was it a very topical subject for the Japanese public, it also gave the filmmakers the ability to get some real footage of a volcano, an active volcano in its eruption. And so Godzilla's reemergence from Mount Mihara actually fits very nicely into this story. Mount Mihara was in the news, so Toho got free publicity out of that. Now, very briefly, I'm just going to go through the cast here. Our hero here on the right is Kunihiko Murata as scientist Kirishima. Physically, he looks the part, and he's fairly good at the role, but really, his function in the Okochi Foundation, working on these G cells, he has so many problems with them with the work he's doing ethically. It really makes you wonder, why is he even working for this company? And that's something that the actor himself had a lot of problems with understanding about the character. He really had to depend on Omori to shape the character, since he really couldn't understand the way it was written. Yoshiko Tanaka, the female star of the film, she was actually pretty well known at this time. She was very high profile because she had gotten a lot of acclaim from her role in the anti-nuclear film Black Rain that was released in 1989. She was actually originally a member of the pop group The Candies. So, her role into her path into becoming an actress followed that of many singers in Japan. She does give a really good performance in this film, probably the best of all the cast. And she did reveal that, being in a Godzilla film was a dream of hers from back in her youth. This is my favorite character of the film, Toru Minagishi playing Colonel Gondo, the head of the anti-Godzilla task force. Even though he doesn't have that much screen time, he really has, a big role in the film, and he plays it with a kind of an edge, but also with a sense of humor that doesn't come off as being forced, and it really kind of flows naturally from the action. I think the SS9 actor probably could have taken a cue from him on how to deliver, humorous asides. And my favorite line of his is that, he complains to some of the other characters that if Godzilla doesn't show up soon, he's going to be out of a job. He has lots of nice little character tics, and I really like his office. He's got photos of Godzilla on the wall, a nice big model of Godzilla, and by the way, look at that. There's an oxygen destroyer in the corner of the room. These two actors, the woman is Yasuko Sawaguchi, who has a cameo in this film as Dr. Shiragami's daughter, who's killed in the opening, and whose cells are used to create Biollante. She actually appeared in the 1984 film. She was the main star of the 1984 film, which was her acting debut, and unfortunately it did look like it. But, in the 5 years since that film, she had become much more of a polished actress and somewhat of a name star for Toho. So she just plays here, a very small part in the film, and pretty much all she's asked to do is die. And unfortunately, even that is kind of not very well handled. When you see her lying on the floor when in the debris after the explosion in the laboratory, she's kind of lying there perfectly still, like she just laid down to take a nap, not like she was tossed about by this enormous explosion. The male actor here is Koji Takahashi, who plays Dr. Shiragami, the mad scientist of this particular film. He had been in a number of science fiction horror films for Toho, and some of the more recent films he had been in were Magnitude 7.9 and Tokyo Blackout. He's kind of like a counterpoint to Dr. Serizawa from the first Godzilla. I mean, unlike Serizawa, he pursues his research knowing of its ethical and dangerous implications. So unlike Serizawa, he makes his own tragedy. It's his actions that bring about his daughter's death by working with these things. And furthermore, he doubles down and makes things worse by taking her cells, combining them with G cells, which eventually lead to the creation of the giant monster Biollante, which winds up threatening Japan and in some cases the world. He's the key character at the center of the biotechnology and ethical debate. And unfortunately, he makes his character, the way he plays the role, he makes his character so focused on his work that he comes off as very cold and unfeeling. And his performance really is rather wooden, without much personality. This has the unfortunate side effect of making him rather unsympathetic. And it also makes me feel like his sudden change of heart at the end of the film, where he suddenly believes that, he shouldn't, mankind shouldn't be doing these kinds of experiments anymore, that it really just doesn't come off as very believable. Okay, now we'll get into the realm of special effects, and introducing Koichi Kawakita, a special effects director who joined Toho in 1962 during King Kong vs. Godzilla, and worked his way up through the ranks, got some experience directing Return of Ultraman and Zone Fighter, and had done a couple of effects films for Toho in previous years to this film. He worked on Sayonara Jupiter in 1983 and Zero Fighter in 1984. He was not part of the 84 Godzilla film. Kawakita basically got the job because Tanaka was looking to move to a new generation. It was his strong desire to, move on. So Teruyushi Nakano was replaced by Kawakita, but strangely, Kawakita had no special memory of how he actually got the job. In a book that he wrote, he said, "I have no memory of someone actually telling me, 'Kawakita, can you be the special effects director?' I prepared Biollante for many years, and I heard rumors out there, and I had an idea I would do it when I first met Omori, but there wasn't any moment where someone told me. Nakano never told me or gave me any advice. I attended all the meetings from early times, but when I noticed, it was like, oh, I'm the effects director? I feel like I kind of missed out. I inherited this position, passed on from Tsuburaya to Arakawa to Nakano. I should have felt more enthusiasm, but I didn't think about it because I didn't have any time to stop and think about it, which, of course, is exactly right because of the time schedule. And speaking of time, I'm realizing that we are running very short on time, so I'm going to have to accelerate the presentation here. Okay, this film, as I mentioned earlier, is full of innovation, and one of the special effects in particular are loaded with lots of innovative techniques. One of them is point of view filming, such as the scene which you see here is the cameraman set up on this little boat that to provide footage of the Super X flying in towards Godzilla during the battle in Uraga Strait. And this is a very famous scene because, as unfortunately what happened is the truck that's pulling this particular raft wound up stopping, and the barge just kind of flipped over in the camera, which is worth like 20 million yen, and cameraman Iguchi wound up in the bottom of the water tank as a result, ruining all the footage and destroying the camera. One of the things they used in this film, which I actually really appreciate, is rather than trying to use miniature helicopters on wires, which typically are very difficult to control realistically, they used radio control helicopters, and they got in model helicopter enthusiasts, hobbyists to control them and use them for scenes like this during the outside battle. Again, here's some of the screen shows some of the footage that they were using for point of view filming. There are also a lot of interesting camera angles and aerial views of action, such as this one taken in the Osaka Business Park. This is actually a really small set. I mean, what you're seeing here is almost the entirety of the set, yet they get an awful lot of mileage out of this particular set. And these kind of different camera angles really add some interesting aspect to the film and some excitement in viewing. They also like to use, Kawakita like to use low perspective angles such as this one for Godzilla's Rampage through Osaka, which give you a kind of a human perspective to put the audience in the scene. And they also used a lot of forced perspective. There's really two scenes that especially use it. This is the Thunderbeam miniature set, Thunderbeam Field, which was made in forced perspective. Here's Godzilla entering the set, and also the Osaka Business Park, which I said is a very small set, but the way it's built here, with that oversized bridge in the foreground, it really creates an excellent effect that you have a very large area that they were able to recreate in a small set. Puppetry was a very prominent feature of this film, which I'll get into a little bit later. And there's also a lot of action in the effects. You get things that are flying around, especially missiles fly across the set and strike and explode on impact, which is really breathtaking. I mean, that's really all a matter of timing by the effects crew trying to, make these missiles fly across the set on wires and strike the target and explode, all at according to a very precise timing. There's lots of pyro, fireworks in this film, smoke and fire effects, which are really quite nice. Lots of explosions, and they do things. Kind of some interesting techniques, such as Godzilla strafing his ray across the ocean and causing a sequence of explosions to trail Godzilla's ray. There's also some very rudimentary computer graphics that are used in this film, which Sure, they look very quaint these days, but actually, they're quite effective, and I like the way that they're using this film because, several times they use them as transitions from the monitors that the military is using into the actual footage of Godzilla appearing in the locations where he's at. So there's lots of interesting camera angles, framing, and movement that you get to see. Unfortunately, I'm gonna, again, running out of time, so I'm going to advance. I'm going to skip a couple of stories. I want to get into the making of Biollante. There are two versions of Biollante: the Ashinoko version, which you see here, which is basically a big plant, and the Wakasa version, the final version, which had not even been designed as of mid-July. So Fuyuki Shinada, who is the suit maker who worked on this film, this was the first suits that he ever made for a motion picture. Before this, he had only worked on TV. And, on TV, you can make suits that aren't very particularly strong, but for a film, they're going to be used for a couple months. So for him, this was a new experience to make suits that are strong enough to last, but not too strong where the suit actors can't move them or do anything with them. So he had to really learn on the fly and under extreme pressure. I mean, his challenge was, especially with the Ashinoko version, was, as he said to me, it's just a rose. It's not really a monster. So what can you do with it? It's just going to sit there and not move. It took him a month to put this particular creature together. And when he delivered to the set, he was really disappointed. He felt bad because everybody kind of looked at it like, okay, whatever. Nobody was impressed by it. And since the suit was since the creature itself was supposed to grow, it was actually built with Velcro strips that would allow the stalk to be expanded in terms of its width. There was actually a guy that would sit on a platform inside, and his job was just to kind of like hold the bud up and move it a little bit. Basically, nothing to do. And the guy who was inside hated it. And when filming was over, he left the studio and never came back. The only real activity for this particular version of the monster was the vines, and the vines were the things that really brought Biollante to life. But water pressure, when these things were used in the water pressure would often just snap the bottom jaws off. So there was a lot of no good filming, and the crew were getting very angry at Shinada because of the fact that these things kept breaking. But I mean, that was basically all they could do. And there is also one story he told that he made a bunch of 3 meter long vines according to the order from the staff. And then one day they asked him, so where are the 6 meter vines? Which unfortunately nobody ever ordered them, so he never made them. And in order to do that, to handle that quickly, he just took 2 of the 3 meter vines and glued them together and covered up the seam. And it was just he learned that sometimes you have to do a little bit more than what the staff is expecting. That is kind of what goes with the territory when you're making these things for a film. Also, I better skip that part. Okay, let's go to the Wakasa version. This thing is absolutely enormous, and also it's a suit in that there's a platform inside where an actor is inside, and he's basically picking up and controlling the mouth with a harness that's put onto his shoulders. Making this was really a nightmare job for Shinada because they didn't finalize the design until September, so he had a whole month of 12-hour days with him and his staff trying to put this thing together in time, and they delivered it on a forklift to the set on October 26th, the last week of October, 7 weeks from release of the film. And not having anything on the stage until the last moment, the staff really didn't know what they could do with this thing, and it was so big it was hard to move. So the final battle really wound up being a lot less than it could have been had they had a little more time to understand the suit and how to work with it. there's this big scene of Biollante rushing across the landscape, and that was probably the most complicated effects scene in the whole film. It took 20 people to do that. You had 3 people pulling the platform with a cable, 3 people pushing the platform with Biollante from behind, the actor inside, the remote control mouth operator, and there's motorized legs that are moving, and there were 12 wireworks guys that controlling 32 wires. They had so much need for wireworks people. They even got people who were onlookers. They just drafted them to help out and get the film, get the vines moving during this film, this scene. It was really quite an amazing thing to see. This suit wound up sitting around on the Toho lot for a couple of years after filming was done, and it became a home for all the stray cats that live on the Toho set, Toho lot. And when they finally took it away, Shinato was there that day, and he remembers thinking that the cats are looking at him like, "Wait, what are you guys doing? You're taking my home away." Eventually, when the suit was removed, the head was taken off and it was sent to Kumagaya University, but unfortunately it was lost in a fire at the school a short time later. Okay, now let's just take a quick look at Godzilla. They made a new suit. They thought 84 lacked balance, so they bulked up the lower body, built up the chest, and they made a smaller and more triangular head. This is the first suit that they made, which is called the NG, as in no good suit, which they wound up modifying. And basically, you can see that the head was still a little bit bigger than what they wanted, and that was one of the things that they reduced. This suit was built with fins that actually lit up from inside. So this is one of the practical effect lightings of the back fins, and I think it was a really nice idea and something I wish they would have stuck with going forward. And in this particular film, it did have some significance, because something that they didn't use at the end of the film was when the anti-nuclear bacteria takes effect, that Godzilla tries to shoot his ray, but he can't. And the fins, instead of glowing white, they glow red to kind of indicate that Godzilla wasn't able to do anything any longer. I'm really not sure why they didn't use that, because I thought it was a really excellent idea. Ken Satsuma, the suit actor for Godzilla, who everyone is, I believe, familiar with. He had a very tense meeting with effects director Kawakita, because during the filming of 1984, Kawakita, his only involvement with that film was to do a making of special, and he had asked Satsuma to put the suit on for some special filming, and at that time he refused Kawakita. So when come time to meet his new boss for this film, it was a very tense situation. Kawakita made sure that Satsuma remembered, how uncooperative he was. But after a little bit of time, the tension faded, and the two of them were able to work together really well. Okay, have to skip things because we're just about out of time, but I do want to at least get into this last bit of things about Godzilla. Godzilla himself, I think one of the things I take away from this film is that they made Godzilla look more alive in this film than they ever had before, and I believe that this robot is one of the reasons why that is true. Originally, Kawakita wanted to make another 3-meter tall robot, much like they did for the 84 film, but that just didn't work because the thing being so large, it's difficult to make it look more like the suit, so there's no visual continuity, and the bigger it gets, the harder it is to get smooth action. So instead, they made this particular robot, which is the same size as the suit, and it's made with made out of the molds that they used to make the suit. So the look is really good, very, very close to what the suit looks like. And just by using wires and the set of bicycle handles that you see there, they were able to make the head writhe around and move in ways that Godzilla had never done before. And so you got a really natural looking performance. And Godzilla, as I say, Godzilla to me had never looked more alive than he did in this film. And then the last thing that to say about Godzilla is they never really shown how Godzilla gets around the ocean. And here they made a swimming model of Godzilla to show that how he actually moves around in the ocean, swimming much like a marine iguana. Well, unfortunately, as I look at the clock, it is 1 o'clock, and I'm only about 2/3 of the way through what I had hoped to do. So, I apologize for that, but I think that unfortunately we need to stop here. So maybe this is like setting up for part 2 that I'll be able to do if we have another session of Kaiju Masterclass. So anyway, I do apologize for having to cut things short, but I hope that at least in the time that we spent here today, that you were able to learn a few things about this film and get some, be able to, watch it again with a little bit of extra enjoyment and understanding of what the film is all about. So thank you again for your interest and attendance, and please enjoy the rest of the day at Kaiju